All right, so thank you all for joining us. Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar titled Pushing the Agenda, Gender Equality in Media Regulation and Organizational Culture. The two questions we're asking ourselves today are, what is the role of media law and policy in promoting gender equality? And how could media organizations create a culture of change? So these are the questions we're asking today at this webinar that brings together media practitioners, researchers, and development agencies from Africa and Asia. And in responding to these questions, we're here to share knowledge, to network, and to discuss the role and importance of media regulation as part of mechanisms to promote women's freedom of expression and gender equality in and through the media. I am Dr. Yemisi Akimbobola, co-founder and CEO of African Women in the Media and senior lecturer at Birmingham City University. So we're going to make really great use of our 1 hour and 30 minutes together today, starting with introductions from my colleagues, Jyoti and Agneta, followed by a presentation by Dr. Sarah Michalia, who's going to talk about the Global Gender and Media Regulation Report, and colleagues from Zimbabwe and Bangladesh, whom I'll also introduce later on, and they will present their national reports as well. After those presentations, we'll be joined by 5 discussants who are media women and who are going to share their reflections on the reports and their own lived experiences as this is relevant to the report as well. From here, we'll go into breakout sessions and I will explain then what we'll be asking. We'll be asking 2 questions to be discussed in each breakout session. And after which, when everybody returns to the main room, we'll have a summary of the outcomes of those discussions. And so without much further ado, I'd like to invite Jyoti Malhotra, who's a senior journalist and president of South Asian Women in Media, and Agneta Soderberg-Jacobson, gender advisor at Foyer Media Institute, to give brief introductions about their organizations. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Akimbobola. Am I going to speak? Agneta, would you like to go first?
No, Jyoti, you're going to speak first.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Dr. Akimbobola. My name is Jyoti Malhotra, and I am I am sort of a regional coordinator of the South Asian Women in the Media. We are a group of women journalists across South Asia, which is in all the countries of South Asia. There are 8 countries in South Asia: India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Maldives, Sri Lanka, and India, of course, which is the largest nation both in terms of size and population. And we began this network about 6 years ago, and we have about 180 women across the region from all the countries. I see a couple of my fellow colleagues from Bangladesh, Kuritulin Miti, and also Chandini from Sri Lanka. And we are, and what is, and I will just be very brief. The thing about South Asia is that many of us have all the rules in our law books against sexual harassment, in favor of gender equality. But what happens on the ground is, even in the English language media, which is so powerful and so influential, even in the English language media, things on the ground don't really work. So we are fighting the battle at various levels. In the regional media, it's much more obvious, much more direct. You have sort of stories of sexual harassment, especially in the smaller towns and districts. But in the national media, in the big metro cities, these issues are also alive and very much kicking. So I'm going to end it there to say that we are a vibrant group. Of course, we need much more networking amongst us across the region, as well as with like-minded colleagues in Africa and elsewhere in the world. But it's wonderful to be here, to connect with all of you. This is only the first time, and I'm sure we will carry this conversation further. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jyoti. And over to you, Agneta.
Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to welcome you to this webinar on behalf of Foyer Media Institute, and we are proud to co-convene this with 2 of our partners, African Women in Media and South Asian Women in Media. And it's great to see so many of you here. For those of you who are not familiar with FOYO, FOYO is a Swedish media development institute, and it's a part of the Linnaeus University. We support free, independent, and professional journalism across the globe and work specifically to make journalism more sustainable, financially, socially, and environmentally. And in this, gender equality as well as diversity at large and social inclusion are all key factors to achieve such change. And as you've already heard, the idea behind this meeting was to bring together women journalists from Asia and Africa together to discuss how gender equality in and through the media can be supported by media regulation and self-regulation. That is media laws and state and industry policies. And of course, in addition to this, what is the role of organizational culture in bringing about change? But this is, of course, is a huge area for a 1.5 hours discussion, and we will, of course, not have time to cover all burning issues, but we can start having a dialogue and help each other to formulate the challenges and at hand and how they can be addressed. And also the discussion and action points from this webinar can hopefully help us all to push the agenda, and it will also inform the organizers going forward strategies. So that was all from me. Back to Dr. Jemisi.
All right, thank you so much, Agneta and Jyoti, for that introduction. And so we're going to move on to the first of our 3 presentations, and this is by Dr. Sarah Macharia from FOYO Media Institute, and she's going to be presenting the Global Gender and Media Regulation Report. Over to you, Dr. Macharia.
Thank you, Yemisi, and I will start by sharing my screen. Okay, so it's really a pleasure and a privilege to have this space to present this research that we carried out together with case studies in a couple of African, Asia, and other countries. So to begin with, let's consider the state of the news media as far as gender equality is concerned. The data tell us that in no country in the world has gender equality in the news been achieved. And this is perhaps not surprising to many of us if we consider that all the gender equality indices convey a similar message about other development sectors. For example, the current SDG Gender Index report says that no country has achieved the promise of gender equality. What is likely surprising is just how far the news media worldwide are from gender equality. This chart depicts performance of various nations on the Gender Equality in News Media Content Index called the GEM Index. This index measures gender equality in sources, in authoritative voices as experts and spokespersons in key bits of politics and the economy, and in the reporters in the news. It's calculated from data from the Global Media Monitoring Project research, which was published last year. This was research that was carried out in more than 100 countries, and a link to the full report will be in the chat. But for now, let's look at this chart, which flows from the left-hand column down to the right-hand. So from the left-hand column, top to bottom, to the right-hand column, top to bottom. It's just sectioned this way to make it fit on the slide. So zero here means full gender equality. Minus 100 means that all subjects, sources, and reporters are men. The green arrows show the positions of Asian countries on the GEM index hierarchy, while the red arrows point to African countries. And what we can understand here is that African and Asian news media sectors dominate the bottom quarter here of this hierarchy, meaning that our news media have the longest way to go to achieving gender equality when compared to the rest of the world. Let's consider a second indicator, also from the Global Media Monitoring Project. And this one measures the proportion of reporters, of women as reporters in print and broadcast news, or the gender equality gap in reporters. Africa's media here are at the tail end of the rest of the world and have retained this tail position for at least a quarter of a century. Asia's position has fluctuated across the period, and currently the news reported gender gap is exactly the same in Asia, Europe, and Latin America. Let's move on to our research. This research came out of a need expressed by media development agencies seeking to build gender equality in the media sector, specifically to identify opportunities for progress through regulation. We were curious about the interplay between women's right to freedom of expression on the one hand, and media freedom and independence on the other hand, in media policy texts, in media legislation, and in the outcomes of regulation. So we carried out a global study. At the same time, in parallel, there were country studies taking place in Bangladesh, Somalia, Rwanda, Zimbabwe, Armenia, and Sweden, and Rwanda. Our approach was, first we conducted a global mapping of regulatory frameworks through an extensive search in online databases, on media regulators' websites, on media policy web portals, and we drew the boundaries of the mapping and analysis around traditional legacy news media forms of print, television, and radio. We excluded other genres such as film and advertising. And for the legal dimension, we analyzed relevant case law. To the desk review of regulatory texts, we analyzed relevant studies published in scholarly journals and other academic publications. And then we carried out a comparative analysis using a gender lens. Of course, we had limitations in finding these texts. One was access. We could analyze only what we could find in the public domain, which we took to be representative of what exists. And the second one was accessibility. For example, instruments that were not in French, English, or Spanish, we could not read. Let's go to one of our major findings is on the supranational policies. These are policies at global, regional, more than 2-country level. And we developed this typology. Type A represents, these are frameworks that represent the greatest promise for progress towards gender just media structures, practices, policies, and output, being the most comprehensive relative to type B and type C. For example, in type A, we have the Beijing Declaration, section J. We have the Maputo Protocol, for example. And then under type B, frameworks under this type do not mention media explicitly, but they draw attention to issues that are in the media's sphere of influence, particularly norms and stereotypes about femininity and masculinity or gender relations in society. And for example, from Asia, the Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Elimination of Violence Against Children in Asian countries that was adopted in 2013. Type C are the less prevalent ones, and their central focus is media freedom and independence, with some mentions to media's role in democracy, such as the Windhoek Declaration. And what the framework signify is that gender equality, freedom of expression, and media freedom and independence are not mutually exclusive. All are necessary for democracy and protected in international standards. And media freedom is not absolute. It is limited by the need to attend to other interests that are present in a democracy. Let's move on to the second level, which is the state level media policy frameworks. So while our mapping was not exhaustive, but indicative of what exists, we found that, that there was a more or less uniform coverage of general gender equality provisions in national constitutions, in national labor laws, in general gender policies, but in sector-specific policies and laws, there are wide cross-national variations. So of the instruments governing media that we retrieve from the websites of national regulatory bodies, 1/3 carry no provisions on gender equality or the general public's right to freedom of expression. And almost 1/2 of these instruments with gender equality measures, they protect the right to non-discrimination on the basis of a list of identities, including sex or gender. We found that there was a lack of further elaboration of gender-related issues, which may be a hesitation to delineate, tighter boundaries and to leave the task of working out the details to the self-regulation levels and to policies within media organizations. We did find a few examples of authorities that have taken up the commitment to foster gender equality. For example, Morocco's HACA, or the High Authority for Audiovisual Communication, that in a number of principles that HACA has adopted, they include commitment to freedom of expression and to fighting sexist images in news and advertising. HACA regularly monitors gender stereotypes and imposes penalties in cases of non-compliance. So remember, I said we looked at two things. One was policy, the other one was legislation, the other half of the coin. On legislation, we found, and I must say that this we carried out with a media law expert, John Barata, and I'm presenting on behalf of the two of us. So on legislation, legal standards define rights to freedom of expression for everyone, and not only media outlets or professional journalists. They define rights to media freedom and independence and to gender equality. Legal standards also establish a series of obligations for states. States have a duty not to restrict or interfere in the exercise of these rights and to create the conditions to guarantee their effectiveness through the most appropriate instruments. What we found, and this was a key finding, that media legal frameworks tend to focus on gender equality and representation in media content as regards combating or avoiding sexist prejudices and stereotypes. And it seems like other legal issues are or should be pursued through general criminal laws and international standards. So restrictions to women's freedom of expression come not only from the legal instruments and judicial and administrative decisions, but they also come from patriarchy in culture, in religion, and in traditions that prescribe and expect women's subordination. So where media laws do not cover specific issues, for example, crimes that emerge on digital platforms, legal solutions would be either to enact new laws or to rely on existing laws and apply them to the media. An example is in South Africa, where the Protection from Harassment Act was used to address harassment both online and offline. In an example, it has been relied on to obtain a protection order for a victim or a survivor of revenge porn. And certain violations cannot be combated by prohibitions or a vague reinterpretation of notions such as hate speech, discriminatory content, etc., but through self-regulation and other mechanisms. I think I'm almost nearing my time. So self-regulation, and this is the last slide, these are frameworks by industry organizations whose roles include monitoring content and responding to public complaints and limiting state interference. What we found common to most codes, from the minimalist to the most elaborate, was this prescription on gender non-discrimination or avoiding sexism. And the codes treat gender as one among various other forms of discrimination. They place equal emphasis on biased treatment of people based on race, religion, disability, ethnicity, and other factors. I think I'm almost near my time, so I'll skip this one. Perhaps we can talk about it in the discussion. And with this, I'll hand back over to Yemisi. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Sarah Michari, for that interesting presentation. And my apologies, we do have to run pretty quickly through each presentation in order to make up the time, but thank you for all of that information. And so we're going to move swiftly on to our next presenter, who is Virginia Mwanegua, who's the lead researcher on Zimbabwe research on gender and media regulation. So over to you, Virginia.
Thank you, and I'm hoping that Joy has uploaded my presentation. If not, I would need to.
Okay. Oh yes, I have it here. So let me see if I can share my screen.
The PowerPoint one?
Yes, I have your presentation here, so I will share my screen.
So while that is happening, hello everybody. So for the Zimbabwe part of the global research, we were a team of 2 researchers, where I am a gender media and communications and development practitioner, and I worked with a colleague who is a lawyer. And we were basically wanting to be able to look at the interface between the gender normative framework and the media framework. So in terms of, is that me? You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so we used a triangle analysis where we were looking at the content of the different laws to do with gender and the laws to do, sorry, that is going too fast. Yeah, the laws to do with gender, the laws to do with media, and also internally within the media outlets, their policies, and looked at how the policies actually determine the culture within the newsrooms. And we were looking at the integration of gender in media laws and regulations, and also the implementation of gender normative framework within the newsrooms. Next slide, please. So in terms of the key finding, and this is what Dr. Macharia has already said, that even where we have a strong gender normative framework, one finds that within the media space that is not necessarily upheld or is not necessarily very visible. So as also in Zimbabwe, we have a very strong gender normative framework where our constitution upholds gender equality and non-discrimination, and it even goes further to prescribe some of the actions that should be taken, like affirmative action. But one finds that even where this has been done in terms of what is written in principle, in practice, it is not, there is no tallying. And then we also found that although we have many gender media support organizations, and they are supporting integration of gender, this needs to be ramped up so that the media policies and also the issues of structure, equal representation on media structures, and also the specific programming by the media organizations need to also reflect gender equality and women empowerment. And then we also felt that the media sector is an institution that speaks truth to power and requests everybody else to be accountable to the Constitution, among other benchmarks. It should also be accountable to the National Gender Constitution and the commitments that have been adopted at that level. Next. We also felt, and this is the point also that Dr. Sarah has already mentioned, that when we look at violations, specific violations, whether it's sexist advertising, whether it's gender-based violence, cyber-based gender-based violence, within the media laws, it's not very visible to the extent that one finds that you have to go to other laws to be able to look at that particular issue. On this particular one, I'm going to say that on the issue of advertising, although we do have structures that look at the content, the issues of equal representation on those structures would also militate against the women's or protection of women's rights, where if you are having an institution or a structure that's supposed to look at the content in advertising, and this is made up of maybe only men, it is likely that they're not going to catch some of those issues that women would find offensive. And then also the gender equality and women empowerment principles in practice, not just in the media, but also across the board in Zimbabwe, is still at a very nascent stage, because it's well written in the Constitution, well written in our national gender policy, in other policies, but in practice, one finds that we're not yet there. And then we also find that women as media workers, as consumers of the information that media outlets put out, and also as citizens, are not as adequately served by the regulatory framework. And this goes back again to the fact that there is a framework that promises so much, but in practice, this is not upheld. So it speaks to the issue of implementing what the framework says. And then the weak media regulation on gender goes against the normative framework. We have the Zimbabwe Media Commission, and it is one of the oldest commissions, and it's a human rights institution, but they've not yet strengthened their work around gender issues. And it might be because they also believe that since there is a whole other commission on Zimbabwe on gender, they don't have to necessarily look at it. But it's important that even within the Zimbabwe Media Commission, they also ensure that the issues of gender are being adequately addressed. Next. Next point. So in terms of our recommendations, we're looking at policymakers first, which is parliament, in the executive, judiciary, and also outside of government, where we are saying they need to balance the content of gender equality and non-discrimination, the representation on different structures that have been set up to deliver our constitution, and then also the culture or the transformation of the constitution into lived realities by the people by ensuring that gender equality and non-discrimination in policies is seen as a right, mandatory, and is also demanded. Because if it's seen as if you feel like doing it, it's okay, but if you don't, it's also okay. So we feel that it's very important that this gender equality and non-discrimination is recognized for what it is, a right. And then in terms of within the media, we just feel that across the board in whatever sector, whether it's the advertising, whether it's whatever areas of the media, the issue of gender mainstreaming should be there, not just in principle, but in practice. And this also needs to be transformed. Okay, let me backtrack on that one. We found that there are most of the media outlets, the leading media outlets, have some form of gender policy or the other, whether written or not written. But the challenge is that it is there, and once again, it's also used as and when somebody feels like using it, but is not necessarily translated into gender action plans, and also having clear monitoring and evaluation frameworks to say to what extent as an institution are we actually integrating gender in all our work at all levels. And then because we also have a lot of civil society organizations that are working around gender and media, we also feel that they need to adopt a multi-sectoral approach to delivering gender and media rights, and also to ensuring gender sensitization, and then building a critical mass that also talks about gender integration in the media. If I can use just my example as an individual, I have a background in media, but I know that when I'm working in the media, we'll be talking as the media sector. So issues of the labor issues, all the other issues that we'll deal with do not really come out because we're just looking at the media as media practitioners. If we are not the union, we are not necessarily looking at the issues of women's labor rights within that. This is not to say that there isn't a lot of work being done, because there's a big campaign around stopping sexual harassment, but I just feel that we need to not have the siloization of the different rights when we are in the media field, when we are in the gender field, when we are in whatever other field. And then it's also important that for the media outlets or the media practice to be gender sensitive, the integration of gender should start very strongly at media training level. We do have a lot of media training institutions, but once again, gender is not effectively integrated as a module, but just comes as a once-off in some of the institutions. I think that's the last one, and I want to thank you, Dr. Yemisi, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Virginia, for that overview of your national study in Zimbabwe. Thank you. And so I move over to Bangladesh with Kuratu Ain Tamina from MRDI, who's the principal investigator for the Bangladesh Gender and Media Regulation Study. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Yemisi. So I will quickly jump to my presentation. Okay. I come from, will you be sharing my?
Yes, I'm just bringing that up now. I believe you should be able to see it now.
Yes. So if we could go to the first slide. Yes. So as you can see, we are a small country with a lot of people, and we worked with a big team. Can we move on to the next one? Next slide. A big team, because if we go to the next one, we mapped and analyzed 43 acts and rules, including the Constitution, and 12 national level media policies. It shows that we have lots of laws and policies, actually. Half of them are general laws which have implications for media, and about half are specifically media-centered. Media internal structure, licensing, and some on employment benefits and violence-related laws. The thing is, we could not find too many self-regulatory codes, written codes. We couldn't find written codes. Unwritten codes or policies do not really count much because it varies from people to people. We also conducted a questionnaire survey of 18 media organizations. Depending on their responses, hardly about 10% of the journalists would be women. Now, the problem is, if we move on to the next slide, we will see in Bangladesh, we now have 3 sexes or genders: female, male, and since 2014, Hijra, which is a intersex community, to be precise. It's not actually, you cannot call them a gender or sex in such way, but that's how the government has recognized. So it's not a recognition of the third gender, but it's a recognition of a very specific community. So these are the contexts of where we look for gender equality in and through media. Now, if we have some things on the female, on women, the last one, 2014, so it's nearly 10 years, 8 years now, but nothing much. Okay, so inequality and lack of diversity is omnipresent as everywhere else. The most interesting thing that struck us and continues to haunt me all the time is that we have constitutional guarantee of equality, but for women, it's specifically in national and public spheres. We have positive discrimination policies also, but inequality reigns in personal laws, which relate to a woman's inheritance, marriage, custody of children, and weakens their status at the very base. And that causes a lot of problems and how the society perceives women. If we can move on, safety and security are major concerns. As contexts, I would just say that our laws, as our other South Asian friends, next slide, our South Asian friends would know that our laws come from a colonial heritage, and historically, media laws have been there for controlling the media. So when we talk about freedom of expression and gender equality, when you do not have freedom of equality, then gender equality becomes a more distant possibility. The owners, the patterns, the politicization, everything works as a context that hamper gender equality, even if you have laws and regulations. If we can move on to the next one. As for laws, from criminal laws to media laws, advertising and films, the earlier provisions were more concerned about when it comes to gender, decency, obscenity, from a moralistic perspective, for protecting the society from harmful effects, not from a rights perspective. And post-Beijing platform for action, the trend is development and media advocacy for women's development. So where is gender equality in media organizations? It's not very prominent. And self-regulatory codes are not there. Next. Very rare. No monitoring mechanism, that's another problem. And interestingly, this is my 35 years in journalism. Time up. But I will just say that the main problem lies with changing the way you look at things. And equality faces resistance everywhere. It's too short a time and I'm not what to do. To me, to ask the team, it seemed like that it would be more useful to have a broad gender equality law or anti-discrimination law covering both public and personal spheres, and an overriding FOE law. Without these two laws, you cannot really hope to achieve what you want to achieve in gender equality. And there is always the risk that stringent media laws could be abused to suppress dissent. They have been doing that all the time. So we would say that we are more for stressing more on having proper policies, especially in-house ones, state ones and in-house ones. So I will say goodbye now. I have overstepped my time, but I hope the slides will be there for you to have a look and think. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much. And my apologies for being so strict on the time. We just have to make sure that we have enough time to go through all the presentations. So very quickly then, I'll now hand over to our last presenter before we go into the discussion with our 5 media women. And this is Chandrima Bhattacharya, who is the Senior Associate Editor at The Telegraph and member of the South Asian Women in Media India chapter, who will be presenting to us the study on harassment and gender discrimination. Over to you, Chandrima.
Hello, friends. Am I audible? Yes.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you the findings of a study that was conducted by SOM in Bengal, which is just alongside Bangladesh. And I will give you just the highlights from the study. In the wake of Me Too in India, we felt the need to take a critical look at how media organizations approach and deal with sexual harassment at workplace. The study is an attempt to understand the situation of sexual harassment of women journalists, and also to understand if media organizations are equal opportunity workplaces for women. The journalists spoke on condition of anonymity. The study was conducted from August 2019 to June 2020 among female and male journalists and HR personnel from media houses in Kolkata, which is the capital of Bengal, West Bengal, and the districts of West Bengal. The methodology adopted was a mix of quantitative and qualitative methods. They included survey, focus group discussions, and in-depth interviews with journalists and HR personnel. The total sample included more than 130 journalists, most of them at senior and mid-level. Study is a collaborative effort between SOM, India, and Sanhita, a gender resource center. Now I'll quickly go through the highlights of the study proper. It clearly emerged from the survey that the study that sexual harassment among journalists was more common than perceived. It wasn't a random occurrence. In fact, other than specific cases of harassment, women journalists in Kolkata and the districts also revealed that the general work culture was sexist. About women were made with impunity by male colleagues, causing great distress to the victims. And this was a regular occurrence. There were very striking revelations by women journalists, remarks, lewd remarks and jokes quoted, which were loaded with sexual innuendos and ignored. Some women journalists said that complaints were not lodged for fear of being labeled NACA or a Naka person, which means a combination of being too delicate and also slightly insincere. The language in the newsroom, they pointed out, was traditionally masculine. So protesting the use of abusive and sexist language would mean that the woman was not a sport or lacked a sense of humor. Among the female journalists surveyed, 56% revealed that they had faced some form of sexual harassment during their career. Of those who reported this, 24% said they encountered sexual harassment while out on assignments. In the in-depth interviews, an overwhelming majority said they knew of at least one instance of sexual harassment within their organizations. Half of them had personally faced sexual harassment within the office premises, and the remaining knew about the experiences of others who had faced harassment. During group discussions, a TV journalist said, "I have faced harassment personally in my job with a television channel. I was on night duty when my boss tried to touch me inappropriately. I initially moved away and then ran out to where the security guard was. He understood and asked me to sit there. The boss got mad and left the office. I got away safely that night. But after that, the boss's behavior changed significantly and he started pressuring me to provide 7 exclusive stories every single day. I was doing the culture beat those days, and with great difficulty, I managed to give these stories. But then he started hounding me on the means I was adopting to get my stories." Sexual harassment is not a black and white thing. There are many shades in it. Of the instances reported, 60% were of verbal nature, 36% reported both verbal and physical harassment, 4% faced verbal and non-verbal harassment. During the interviews, women journalists narrated one instance after another, which revealed how emboldened some of the men in power were. They brazenly transgressed all kinds of appropriate workplace behavior. Discrimination and sexual harassment go hand in hand. Sexual harassment faced by women journalists is a symptom of deeper malaise that prevails across media houses. It begins with a heavily skewed and imbalanced gender ratio within organizations. While the recruitment of women was slow to start with, it steadily increased over the years. However, there are still media houses that either don't recruit women or hire them only for desk jobs. In the interviews, women spoke of the hostility they faced by virtue of being isolated or singled out within a male-dominated workplace and during reporting assignments. The discrimination, which began with recruitment, continued at every level, from the assignment of beats to growth and promotion opportunities. It came camouflaged in various forms as benign patriarchy, which manifested in statements like, women cannot attend night shifts. We cannot recruit women in night shifts as they cannot do the work or come during night. The implication was that
you've got to wrap it up now. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Should I wind up?
Yes, please. If you take maybe another 30 seconds just to finish.
Yes,
Thank you.
Okay. So so there was benign patriarchy, there was sexist platitudes, there was stereotyping, there was dismissiveness, and there was apathy and indifference to anything that the women said, almost in an institutional way. And finally, we spotted a slight ray of hope because there were few positive instances of how media houses had adopted zero tolerance to sexual harassment and put systems in place to ensure the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chandrima, for that presentation. And thank you to all our 4 presenters today, from Dr. Muchere, who gave the global perspective, to Virginia, who looked at Zimbabwe, Kurantul Ain, who spoke to us about Bangladesh, and Chandrima, who just spoke to us about India. Thank you very much. And now we're going to move on to our next section, which is reflections from our five discussants today. We've got Tanzila Mara, who's the co-founder of Women in Media Alliance in Pakistan and member of SON, Pakistan. We have Shandani Kirinde, who is the senior journalist and contributing to Daily Financial Times, a member of SOM Sri Lanka. We have Bokani King, who's a journalist and founder of King on Media, an executive board member of the Women in Tourism Botswana. Quinta Mbori, who's an award-winning gender equality advocate and the first president of the Standard Group Women Network and founder of the Women Kenya Network, co-founder also of the Women in Leadership Circle. And finally, we have Comfort Musa, who is a multimedia journalist from Cameroon, who has won a number of awards for a willingness to investigate sensitive topics, including social justice and gender rights. She's the founder of Sister Speak 237. So welcome to our five discussants. I'm going to hand over to you all and invite you to speak and share your reflections on the presentations we've had today. If you could please put on your video as well so that I can spotlight you. Okay, and the first person we're going to have speaking is Tanzila. Over to you, Tanzila.
Thank you so much, and thank you, African Women in Media and SOM for organizing this webinar and connecting us to the women journalists of across the continents. I have seen the presentation, and it reinforced my thinking about issues that we all face same issues. Same inequalities, we are fighting same injustice within our own societies. So if we talk about women in media from Pakistan, how are they being treated? We see a lot of women on screens. We have a lot of women reporters who are covering war zones, who are covering very sensitive and hard issues, but still the treatment is there, which shows that we are not equal, we are not treated equally. We have discriminations in salaries, we have discriminatory practices in assignments of tasks, especially if we talk about maternity leave. We don't have any concept. Many of our colleagues had to leave their job when they were going to have a child. So as such, if we talk about regulation and rules and law, we don't have any special laws for gender equality within the media. But we have been discussing that we need a code for gender equality, and we need a code for sensitization within the media industry to not treat women as object. Objectification of women is very common in Pakistani media, whether it comes to having you on screen as an object and not let you contribute on issues which matter. And if we talk about advertisement industry, we talk about entertainment industry, so objectification of women is everywhere. But good thing is that there are few organizations, few alliances within the media. They are working and collaborating with each other. International organizations are very active in Pakistan. We have been talking about protecting, how to protect women. And especially this law, harassment at workplace law, which was passed in 2010, has changed the environment. Though it is not, it has not shown results, 100% results so far, but still I'm hoping for a better conducive work environment for women. And also we are trying to have collaboration with political parties of Pakistan, because women from parliament, they are also facing harassment and discrimination. So I think we need to change overall culture and media can play a very important role. Organizations like SOM, organizations like our own alliance within Pakistan, we are talking, we are trying to have a discourse so we could change the culture. Thank you very much. I know time is limited, so I tried to share my reflection very quickly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanzila, and thank you for keeping to the 3 minutes allocated. Thank you so much. Next up is Chandani Kirinde. So Chandani, you have 3 minutes. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yes. Thank you for inviting me to this very interesting webinar. Like Tanzila said a short while ago, it's a lot of the problems from the presentations. What I gathered is that a lot of the problems that we face are quite similar. All the women in media seem to be facing the same kind of problems across Asia and Africa. So in Sri Lanka too, there are quite a lot of women in the media, both electronic and the print, but issues that women face are not specifically addressed. Now you spoke about sexual harassment and stuff that happens there. Unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, we don't have any sexual harassment laws for the country as well. So it's prevalent all over. So in media institutions, what is reflected there is a reflection of what can happen in any other office. But say a few months ago, there was an incident which came to light of a woman journalist who had faced some kind of harassment, and which kind of caused a bit of an uproar. So certain organizations on their own started to draft a law, some kind of rules within the organization. So the organization I work for, they came up with a policy against sexual harassment, which kind of, it was circulated within the organization. And I think it kind of made especially the men to kind of realize that their women colleagues face all kinds of problems, and it kind of, made them realize that there are issues. So these are, that's one of the issues. But I think another thing is, something that I noticed in the presentation is like, we have a lot of training programs and stuff in Sri Lanka as well. But like one of the presenters said, they don't, during none of those programs do they really emphasize on, issues like it is just discussed as a passing subject, but there is no it's not emphasized that the importance of gender equality in the media training needs to be heightened more. So it's referred to as a passing issue. So I think once that is done, I think it has to start within our organization, this kind of thing, because I think first our male colleagues have to realize that, the women they work with also face the kind of stories that you report on. Your women colleagues also face, some of them also face this kind of issue. So it's a subject that we really need to discuss, and I'm glad we're having this discussion, and I hope we can, at least in the South Asia context, have a wider discussion on this. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Chandani, for that contribution. And next up, we have Bokani King from Botswana. Over to you, Bokani.
Good afternoon, ladies. Good afternoon. I think the conversations that we have been having today are very similar to what we're experiencing, especially across the continent, across the world, because women issues, gender issues are really issues that we struggle to handle, especially in the media space, because we have realized that across the media space there are more men than there are women in our newsrooms, and this is a bit of a challenge because it affects how we make policies that improve, that try to advocate for gender equality, that try to advocate for women, also that talk to issues of harassment, to issues of gender-based violence, to issues of sexual harassment, to issues of equal pay. And I like that we have been highlighting the inclusion of men. But I think one thing that is also important to note is that when we try to include men into our policies, into becoming champions for women issues, it is important to incorporate men who are actually passionate about women issues. You know, if you're going to take somebody who is just being forced to champion women issues, to champion GBV, to champion gender issues, they're not going to be doing it wholeheartedly. They're not going to be doing it to their best abilities, because it's not something they're passionate about. So men should also be passionate about driving these issues. Men should be passionate about advocating for women, because we are all, you know, we're all one, you know. Our men have children, they have daughters, they have wives, sisters, and mothers that they need to advocate for. So this is not just them saying, oh, I'm just advocating for a colleague or for a stranger. This is trying to make the world a better place for other women. This is trying to make the media space a safe place so that women can be able to talk about issues. They can be able to bring out issues. Then the men can also be able to identify issues that women maybe are not able to identify, and the men can try and convince other men that, you know, it is important to talk about issues about women. It is important to advocate for women. It is important to include women in the media space, because women are just as educated as the men are. And the other thing that we need to do is to encourage policies. There are a lot of media houses, not only here in Botswana, but I should think across the world, that do not have media policies. So it is also important to have that conversation, to include those policies in whatever we do, because without those policies, we can't be talking about advocating for gender. We can't be talking about gender patriarchy. We also need to have women's sources, female sources, who also need to be protected. So having policies that speak to women will help better our media houses, and will help better the media industry across the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bukani. And I saw a question there about Kenya. So it's up that we're going to Quinta Mbori next from Kenya. Over to you, Quinta.
Thank you so much, Yemisi. Now, just listening to my colleagues from across the board, you know, I can't help to think that we actually share very similar circumstances. It's like we are moving from it's the same script, but now we are moving to different casts. But what really breaks my heart is the fact that, you know, sometimes I think that some countries or some situations are privileged in the sense that we even have, you know, gender laws or media laws that protect women, protect freedom of speech, freedom of media, access to information. But I can honestly pick from some of the presenters today that such laws don't even exist, even laws that protect women against sexual harassment. That is such a pity. Now, moving forward, possibly what I can say is, as women in the media, the question that we need to ask ourselves is this: what can we do? What do we have in our hands? What are the low-hanging fruits that we can use? And I think that is the question that we asked ourselves as an organization at Standard Group. We realize that fine, we have the constitutional backup, we have, you know, even have an affirmative action rule that advocates for two-thirds gender representation, but you can imagine even the people who represent us in parliament have not managed to have that rule, that law passed, that bill passed. So I'm thinking, how then are we exposed as people who work in media? Because if the constitution cannot protect us, then evidently we have been exposed. So we asked ourselves that question: what is it that we have in our hands? And this was after there was an employee engagement survey that was done. So I think if we can find the things that can work for us, we realize that we could actually create a network of women in the media organization. And that space has really worked for us. I'll just, because of time, I'll only speak of one milestone. And that actually two, and that involves creating an anti-sexual harassment policy. As a women's network, we took it upon ourselves, and we partnered with like-minded organizations and some departments in the organization, and we're able to review our anti-sexual harassment policy. We were able to train employees. We were able to roll out a brand new harassment policy, which has actually taken shape, and we are dealing with issues as they come. The other thing that we did was create what we call a gender unit or a gender desk, just to try and narrow that gender gap. So I would say that gender mainstreaming is a process. You know, we might not be able to achieve so much right now, but we have to start thinking in terms of how do we shift our organizational cultures, how do we shift our way of thinking. That becomes very, very important. The other thing I would recommend is, you know, something I would call a dual approach. How do we combine our gender mainstreaming initiatives with other processes and policies that are already existing within our different organizations? And then, of course, we are journalists. So there are things that we can do with the tools that we have. We have the power of the pen. So it's about time probably we tried to collect, you know, gender segregated data. We highlighted stories about gender inequality. We highlighted stories to do with sexual harassment, just to find ways and means to counter some of these issues that we are grappling with as women in the media. In the interest of time, I'm just going to end there.
Thank you. Thank you, Quinta. Thank you very much. And very quickly now, we'll move over to Comfort Musa from Cameroon. Over to you, Comfort.
Hi, Dr. Yamisi. Thanks for inviting me to this webinar. Since time is of the essence, I will try not to repeat some of the other points that our sisters have already raised when it comes to this topic of gender equality and media regulation in Cameroon. I would say our experiences are pretty much similar to all the other experiences that have been shared here. But specifically to Cameroon, I would say our laws punish sexual assault, but it's not very specific to harassment. There it is blurry. So we have widespread sexual harassment of women in Cameroon media. Women in media are beginning to break the silence about this. They're talking about it, but then when they speak out, there is no exact unit to punish it. So you have women in newsrooms who have said, I've been harassed by the technician, or I've been harassed by the editor in so and so way, but the media bosses do not know what to do because their policies are not specific about what to do in cases of harassment. It mentions it broadly, but it's not specific. And it also leads me to an observation that I made after discussing with several female journalists in different associations around gender policies. And each time I have asked other women journalists in Cameroon if they have a gender policy in their newsroom, they always say, no, I'm yet to find a female journalist who works in a newsroom that has a specific gender policy, you know, that shows that the media house is intentional about equality and there's laid down rules and guidelines for behaviors and punishment and sanctions when people don't act right. And so because these policies do not exist, because our law is not specific about harassment, it continues. We are breaking the silence, but there is no punishment because that punishment is not even spelled out in the first place. So in Cameroon, what we're trying to do is encourage more women when they are signing their work contracts and they're being told the editorial policy of the newsroom to ask the newsroom, what is the gender policy? Also, the realities will vary based on where you work, if you're a freelancer, public media or private media. Most journalists in private media spaces do not have social insurance, and this affects women a lot and leads, to more gender inequality. Because, for example, a woman who has a regular column in a newspaper or runs a particular radio or TV show who has just had a baby and works in a company where they don't have paid maternity leave, you have them rushing back to work 3 weeks after delivery or 4 weeks after delivery because they have a job to keep and they're afraid to lose the column or to lose their shoulder male colleagues. And also because the office will say, you're a woman, take your time to have your baby, but we cannot guarantee that your job will be here when you come back. And that's a massive area of inequality that has put many women, especially those in private sectors, to put their health at risk just to return to work. And this is because they don't have social insurance policies. Again, issues of policies. For example, when I signed my work contract, I was very specific to my boss. If I have a baby, what are the guarantees? What safety is there? And these are questions that as female journalists, we must begin to bring into the news, into the spaces where we are negotiating for work to make sure that our safety is guaranteed. We need to negotiate our safety. So if there's no safety, if there's no gender policy, or your office is not clear about harassment, what we're encouraging female journalists to do in Cameroon is to negotiate it. When you're negotiating your salary, negotiate your safety, because at the moment, current laws and policies are not specific about it. In Cameroon, we have a law that is very clear about access to information, and that any journalist can access public records. But this law, again, is not specific in context, in the sense that we have more than just the public administration of the government. We also have traditional systems where you have chiefs and palaces and kingdoms. And in most of these places, women cannot access the courts, they cannot take pictures. So male journalists will have access to certain spaces that women cannot. And
thank you,
when you
Comfort. Could you wrap up real quick? Thank you.
Yeah. So I would just say in this case, our advocacy now is towards having gender-specific access to information law, because it exists, but it doesn't protect our interests as female journalists. And I'll end with this. Media regulation and the laws target hard and prime newscasts, failing to see that what happens in between the prime newscast, the discussion topics and documentaries sometimes trivialize and have very insensitive content, but our media regulators focus a lot on hard and prime newscasts and ignore these other sessions where the hosts undo a lot of what we're doing when we teach gender-sensitive reporting. So media regulation in this sense should go beyond just prime newscasts to all media content. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comfort. That was really interesting to hear. So we heard from Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Botswana, Kenya, and Cameroon. So a broad range of views there. Now we're going to move into the breakout sessions, and we are 20 minutes to the end of this session. But we're going to give the 20 minutes to the breakout rooms, because I think that's really important conversation. In the breakout rooms will be split into groups of 10. And please, when you enter your breakout room, do assign somebody to be a note taker and somebody to be a facilitator. And the role of the facilitator is to pose the 2 questions that we have for the breakout rooms. And we will paste these questions in the chat as well, but please take notes. So the first question is, what are the most pressing gender inequality issues in the media sector in your country? And as you reflect on this, if you know of laws and policies which exist to address these issues, please also share them, and also think about how well these policies are performing. So the first question I'll repeat is, what are the most pressing gender inequality issues in the media sector in your country? The second question is, how could gaps between regulations, laws, policies, ethics codes, etc., be supportive of gender equality and women's rights in the media and the lived experiences of gender discrimination, sexual harassment as well? So how can gaps between regulation be more, and the lived experiences of women be more supportive through these mechanisms? And so, like I said, we've put you all into breakout sessions. Please, when you get in there, identify a note taker and a facilitator. You have 10 minutes per question in order to have enough time for us to feedback here. So I won't take much of your time, and I'll now ask Joy to put us into the breakout rooms, please. Thank you.
Hi, Irene. Can you confirm that you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, Joy. Thank you.
That's great. All right. So everyone who is in the room, we have 5 minutes to the end of the breakout rooms. Would you guys like to join any? I've seen a few people who were in rooms. Are you coming back from a room or okay, they are going back?
Okay, brilliant. So we're just waiting for everybody to return to the room gradually. Hopefully you all had really interesting conversations like we did in my room. Okay, everybody's slowly coming back. I think we had about 69 or so people originally. We're now at 43. So still coming back. All right, I think most people are back in the room now. So brilliant. We had really interesting conversation in the room that I am in. We don't have enough time to go through feedback for every single room. So what I'll ask, I will be inviting 2 people to speak and to share their reflections from their room. So Patricia, who was in the room with me, and then Sarah Macharia, to share the reflections from her room as well. But could I also invite all the note takers to put in the chat box the feedback from their room? So if you notice, I have put in some of the feedback from my room in the chat. So if you could do the same, whilst these 2 ladies share the reflections from their room. My apologies that we can't go through everybody just because of the interest of time. So Patricia, over to you. And please, when you're speaking, do focus on the country and don't necessarily highlight the person who spoke. Thank you.
Yeah. So from India, we had 2 people speaking. One of them highlighted that there is no maternity leave in media organizations. Therefore, any woman who decides to become a mother is out on a limb, no pay for 3 months. Then another speaker said that it seems that newsrooms do not allow for women to be mothers because there are no creches, and it's not women friendly, the whole newsroom. There are no women on the top. So if you leave, taking maternity leave means also that you leave yourself prone to not getting promoted on various issues. Then from Nigeria, we had the person who spoke said we can't say we have a gender balance in that country. But the male journalists apparently have said that we are not the ones who are putting women at the back, but women themselves do not promote themselves because they have too many hang-ups being women. There is no gender balance, no gender equality, even in academia. And despite 60% of people in the media being women, they still haven't been able to make a dent. Then from Kenya, 4 out of 5 graduates are women, but sexual harassment is rampant and women are underrated. There are laws, but they're not being properly implemented. Then the next question is, how can the gender gaps be resolved? Regulations, policies, and lived experiences. So the first thing is that we must ensure women get maternity leave as the country. I think all countries today have a policy for that, but media houses are not implementing them. Then there is also this demand for safety for women journalists, especially those in the television media, because one person was killed in Delhi. A TV journalist was killed after she walked out of the TV studio. There are rape threats. Women are being particularly trolled. They need more security, and this online hate machinery needs to be resolved in this country, in India. Then Wanjiru, I don't remember what country I forgot to note which country she is from. She says there are gaps in media regulation and we need to even ask for paternity leave, help women address sexual harassment at the workplace. There should be mechanisms to do that. And what happens to those who are involved in sexual harassment? We should actually put issues up front that affect women. From Nigeria, why is it that there are no women in senior positions in the media where they can be involved in policy making? From Uganda, a survey says that there needs to be better analysis of laws and policies, because in that country, they are silent on gender equality. So they need to update laws and policies and revise the existing laws and policies and make them more gender sensitive. That's about it that I could record.
Brilliant, and that's quite substantial. So thank you so much, Patricia, for that. So next, I'm going to invite Dr. Macharia to also give us the highlights from her group.
Thank you, Dr. Emisi. So we had participants from Tanzania, Rwanda, Kenya, Nigeria, and others. And in all those countries, sexual harassment is a problem. A lot of silence around sexual harassment because of the shame and stigma that come with reporting. A second pressing gender inequality issue is regarding representation of women in the media as sources, as journalists, as leaders. On the second question, the gaps, addressing the gaps between regulation and the lived experience, we had some interesting comments. I think the one that was really interesting was about having a multi-stakeholder approach where you involve the unions, the media associations, media regulators, all of them working together to address these issues. Secondly, the need for a monitoring system. For example, an example from Rwanda was, where there is there are quota laws where 30% of those who are selected have to be women. So in other sectors that applies, but in the media, not much effort is put. And there needs to be effort to monitor this implementation of national gender equality laws in the media sector. The need to sensitize media and the whole community. This is not talking about other supportive measures. Again, in Rwanda, there are self-regulation organs, or bodies, but they focus on press freedom and not on gender equality, and they need to be accountable. They need to report on what they have done. There was one also very good example of a women-owned media house that has its own guidelines. When journalists go to the field, they have to find women sources. They are tasked to find women sources. They are tasked to include topics that interest women. And there is a need to talk about inequalities whenever possible. And then a final recommendation was for women to need for women in media to form support groups for counseling, for support, to eliminate that isolation that comes with for women working in the sector. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dr. Macharia. So thank you, everybody, for joining this very important conversation. We've had presentation from research, we've had insight from media practitioners, and we've all been able to offer our own perspectives and recommendations of action. So it's my pleasure now, very quickly, to invite Agneta to give us some closing remarks so that we can round up today. Thank you all so much. Over to you, Agneta.
Okay, thank you very much, Yemisi. I will keep this very short. I must say, I think the strongest takeaway from this session is, the feeling that these are actually all the challenges and problems are the same everywhere. We knew this before, but it became even stronger. And also what stands out is sexual harassment. And I found it particularly interesting when, I think it was from Pakistan, when we talked about, journalists and politicians being having the same kind of problems, but you could collaborate also with women politicians. All of this, all the problems and challenges that we face, the fact that they are global, makes it depressing, but on the other hand, it's also, we can also learn from each other and strategize around solutions. And I picked up something that I liked very much from Quinta. She talked about the importance to apply a dual approach. This with what we've talked about, gender mainstreaming, develop policies and mechanisms, but also she pointed at the power of the pen, how important it is to write about women's issues and have gender angles in the content that we produce. So I'll keep it that short, and I'll just say that again, that I'm really happy that we're all here together across continents, that we got the opportunity to have this meeting. thanks to AWIM that offered your platform. So thanks again, everyone, and especially AWIM for offering us this platform, and Sam for being part of this great meeting, organizing this.
Well, thank you so much, Agneta. Thank you to all our speakers today. And thank you to the South Asian Women in Media Association. Thank you also to For Media Institute, and to all our presenters, journalists, and everybody who participated today. And we look forward to further engagement with you. This is surely the beginning of a very long conversation and a point of action. Thank you and have a good afternoon. Take care.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you.
Okay, goodbye.
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 Bye.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
I had asked if we're
No
not
photo?
having a photo. Too
Oh,
late.
that's very true. Perhaps all the speakers, or everybody, if we all put up our photos, I know a lot of us.
For the first time, I'm seeing Dr.
Okay, so if we could put on our photo, our videos, then we'll take a picture at least of the speakers. If everybody else is leaving the room.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. All right, Joy, are you able to take a picture of us?
Yes, but I can't find Dr. Sarah.
Oh,
Did she
Sarah
leave?
left already. Oh, never mind.
Oh, so I'll just take with the people whose videos are.
You take us, yeah. Thank you.
All right, just a moment.
I need to always remember that.
All right.
All right, brilliant.
Thank you so much,
all.
everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Great
Take care, everybody.
contributions.
My picture, please.
Yeah,
Bye.
let's keep in touch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.